Throughout its history, Madam Deputy Speaker, the BBC has always adapted and evolved. This is an institution that began in the era of radio, when it was deemed an existential threat to the newspaper industry. It evolved into the age of mass audiences, ushered in by the invention of television, and it navigated the complexities of reporting during the Second World War. We will imminently begin the Charter Review, which will set the terms of the BBC for the next decade, and through it we will collectively write the next chapter of the BBC's story. Together we will ensure the BBC is sustainably funded, commands the public's trust, and continues to drive growth, good jobs, skills and creativity across every region and nation of the UK. In an era in which trust is fraying and truth is contested across our nation, it will ensure the BBC remains fiercely independent and is genuinely accountable to the public it serves. We will publish a Green Paper and launch a public consultation shortly, and I will set out more detail to the House in the coming weeks. I would like to thank the outgoing Director General for his service and his commitment to public service broadcasting over many years. And I'd like to thank the CEO of News for leading the BBC's news operation through stormy times. I do not underestimate the challenge of taking on these roles and the personal toll that they can take on the individuals who hold them. As we write the next chapter of an institution that has stood at the centre of British public life for a century, our overarching goal is simple: to ensure the BBC can renew its mission for the modern age and continue to inform, educate and entertain, not just for the coming decade, but well into the next century. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Right Honourable Lady for advance notice of her statement. The BBC is in a sorry mess, and sadly one of its own making, that has resulted in the resignations of the Director General and the CEO of News. These recent leadership changes are a response to the growing number of examples of bias in the BBC, one of which has resulted in a potential $1 billion lawsuit. This is why the Leader of the Opposition has said the BBC needs to change and needs saving from itself. Otherwise, we may all pay the price in reputational damage and in our pockets as licence fee payers. We all want the BBC to succeed, to be the best possible version of itself, but that requires institutional change and far more than a few moves at the top. But let me first acknowledge, Madam Deputy Speaker, some of the many good things that the BBC does well in delivering on its principles to inform, educate and entertain, from Strictly and Traitors to world-class natural history programming, sport and local radio, and coverage of major national events, including, of course, the recent remembrance services and events. These are things we can all be proud of, that contribute positively to the BBC's brand and reputation at home and abroad. But the BBC also has a charter obligation for impartiality, and too many examples have come to light exposing bias at the BBC, particularly as it relates to the news and current affairs output. Examples that have often strayed far away from the BBC's own editorial guidelines. The coverage of trans rights, selective push notifications of news, the Gaza documentary, the output of the Arabic News Service, reliance on stats provided by Hamas, all speak to bias at the BBC. And at a time when anti-Semitism is rising around the world, the BBC should surely think twice about distributing questionable data from a terrorist organisation bent on the destruction of Israel. We expect better from our national broadcaster. And I am glad that the BBC chair has admitted an error of judgment relating to the Panorama programme on Donald Trump, which involved editing of his speech to give the impression that he said something that he did not say. The BBC now faces a hefty lawsuit, and we do not want to see the taxpayer, the licence fee payer, or the rest of the BBC suffer because of the poor judgment of Panorama programme makers who seem unable to distinguish opinion from impartial journalism, who clearly all thought.
The Liberal Democrats have always pushed the BBC to be better, delivering genuinely balanced reporting, rigorous investigation and the best journalism in the world. We believe in a strong, independent, publicly funded BBC that values factuality, scrutiny and accountability in our democracy. The BBC clearly isn't perfect, and it's right that we hold it to the highest standards. The Panorama editing error was a serious mistake, and we welcome the BBC's apology. The resignations of Davie and Deborah Turness must be an opportunity for the BBC to turn a new leaf, to rebuild trust and return to its core mission to inform, educate and entertain. However, it is obvious to everyone that this issue is being weaponised by those who want to undermine the BBC and who would profit from its demise. Without the BBC, we are more vulnerable to the dangerous misinformation and conspiracy theories that populists like the member for Clacton and Donald Trump trade on, and we cannot let that happen. So as the government navigates Trump's latest tantrum, threatening to sue the BBC for $1 billion, can I ask the Secretary of State, what is she doing to stand up for the BBC, Britain's BBC, which is the most trusted source of information in the world? And speaking of interference by bad actors, serious concerns remain over the conduct of Sir Robbie Gibb during his tenure on the BBC board. We need to have absolute confidence that the BBC can operate free from political influence, factional interest or personal agendas. So if the Secretary of State truly believes in an independent BBC, will she now also sack Robbie Gibb, end the political grip on the BBC board, and listen to Liberal Democrat calls to guarantee that the appointment of the next Director General is transparent, impartial and worthy of the trust that British public places in the BBC?
Can I thank my right honourable friend for her leadership on this and wholeheartedly welcome her words that political figures shouldn't be presenters of the news. Surely this should also apply to arbiters of news standards. I wonder if in the reforms we could look at the 4-person Editorial Standards Committee, now that 2 of them have gone in the resignations, leaving the most senior one, someone who's owned a newspaper in this time, breaching the IPC guidelines, the ex-Conservative Director of Communications, Robbie Gibb.
She mentions the Editorial Standards Committee, the ESGC, which has been the source of much debate and scrutiny over recent days. I have discussed this directly with the chair of the BBC. I understand that changes are planned to that committee, and I very much welcome that decision.
$25 करोड़ गरीब गरीबी को परास्त करके बाहर निकले।
For the good of our nation, let's work together and let's truly make America great again.
The fastest news breaks.
Requested PM saying that you will have to speak to Putin and to Zelensky.
The biggest newsmakers.
The relationship with India is probably the most important bilateral relationship the US will have for the rest of this century.
The capital delivered quite an election result today.
Expert analysis.
The million-dollar question today is how to stop this dance of death.
Ground reports.
I'm standing at the crossroad of the Kumbh Mela. Behind me are more than 100 entry ghats.
Long-form interviews.
Exclusionary politics is reflected in Manipur case as well. You don't bother because this is a small state.
Deep dive into burning issues.
It's often said DRC could be the richest country in the whole world. It's because of what sits underneath.
Why exactly did the US topple the Sheikh Hasina government?
HT videos. We don't just break news, we break it down.